right, welcome back, y'all. We are in SHT Vitality. We are in the nutritional vitality part of this three-part series. And today within nutritional vitality, we want to talk about nutritional sufficiency and how we achieve nutrient sufficiency. So in this video, we're going to talk about what are nutrients, what are the roles of macronutrients in the body, what are the nutrients that we actually need, and where should we be getting those nutrients from. We'll talk a little bit about ancestral wisdom, the human digestive system, vital foods versus dead foods, and then our definition of real food. All right, so first let's talk about nutrients. What are nutrients? Well, nutrients are the things that the body uses to contribute to structure, form, and function. Nutrients are what the body uses to build the body, and then nutrients are also the precursors to all the different biochemical and metabolic reactions inside the body. So I think most of us can understand and comprehend that we build the body with something. We're not getting what we're building this body from the air that we breathe or the water that we drink. So something is building this body because the body is always replacing itself. That's coming from food. But then also our ability to think and feel good and create hormones. Everything and anything that happens inside the body requires nutrient precursors. All right, so nutrients are the things that the body uses to do what it needs to do. So then the question is, what are the nutrients that we need? Well, the reason that we call them nutrients are because we need them. We already know what the body needs to a large degree because we've dissected it. We've broken the body down, we've analyzed the different tissues and muscles and tendons and organs, and so we kind of understand what the body is made of, although we're always learning about cofactors and coenzymes and different things that are necessary for different reactions. But in general, we have a big picture of what we need. We need vitamins, we need fat-soluble vitamins, water-soluble vitamins, we need minerals, we need proteins and amino acids, we need fats and fatty acids, we need cofactors that help the body assimilate and use those things properly. And then in this holistic functional world, we'd also say that it benefits to have life force and vitality. Because if we consume something that has life force and vitality and perishability, then we inherit that life force and vitality. All right, so, and then there's probably a lot of things that we don't know about yet because we're constantly discovering new microscopic and minute little things that the body uses and creates and offsets and that are considered cofactors to utilizing these different nutrients properly. But from a big picture standpoint, we understand basically what it is that we need. So it's helpful to understand the important roles of macronutrients. And when we say macro, we're talking about big picture idea nutrients. And to us, macronutrients means our meats and our fats and our carbohydrates and plant matter. All right, so we have a whole presentation and talk around macronutrients. We're going to give you a brief overview right now, just so we understand the importance of eating these different things. So when we eat fat, most people think about fat, especially if they're not in our holistic real food way of eating, most people think about fat as excess calories and excess body fat and cholesterol problems, really. But we understand that if we're eating the right kind of fats from traditional sources, there's a lot of beneficial roles that fat's playing inside the body. One of the main ones is we're trying to get the body to use fat for fuel as an energy source. And if we're trying to do that, then of course dietary fat is going to help with that because dietary fat can give us a source of energy. But fat also contributes to a lot of the structure in the body. If I look at this body is made up of a lot of proteins and fats. Right, so my body depends on fat for structure. My cell membranes are made up of what is known as a phospholipid or bilipid layer. So fatty acids make up, even at the cellular level, all my cells. So fat is extremely important to be eating on a regular basis from the right sources. Also, when we eat fat, we help absorb fat-soluble nutrients. By definition, fat-soluble nutrients need the presence of fat to be assimilated, and these are extremely important nutrients like vitamin A, D, E, and K. And then fat also helps us stimulate our gallbladder because every time fat enters our small intestine, our gallbladder squeezes, and when the gallbladder squeezes, it stays active. We're also getting rid of toxins in that process. Fat also plays a role in slowing the absorption of glucose or sugar or starch. So when we have meals that contain fat, it minimizes the impact on blood sugar levels. And then inflammation in the body is managed by certain fatty acid precursors. So when we eat traditional fats, there's a lot of beneficial things that are coming from that. Same thing when we eat meat and proteins that get broken down into amino acids and then reassembled into proteins. A lot of our structure depends on proteins and amino acids, but then enzymes are amino acids. Enzymes are the catalyst for metabolic and biochemical processes inside the body. Antibodies are made up of amino acids and proteins, which means that our immune function depends on certain proteins. Hemoglobin transports oxygen throughout the body. It's made up of specific proteins and amino acids. Hormones require certain amino acids to be created properly. Neurotransmitters are how neurons in the brain communicate, and then also neurotransmitters bathe the entire body, because this is how our cells communicate, our systems communicate, our organs communicate. And so eating the right proteins and amino acids helps us communicate and think and form connections and all those different things associated with neuron connections. And then also our genetic function and predispositions are turned on and off by certain amino acids and proteins. So there's a lot of benefits that come from eating meats and proteins that get broken down into amino acids. And then plant matter serves some beneficial roles inside the body. Of course, it's very detoxifying, but we also get some unique nutrients, a unique nutrient profile, a lot of the water-soluble vitamins and plant-based nutrients. So the reason that we're going over all this is because we want to understand how important it is that we're eating foods that contribute to what this body is. That automatically should start to dictate the things that we eat and the things that we shouldn't eat. So without even covering our definition of real food yet, understanding what this body is made of, I probably want to eat things that resemble what this body is made of, which is part of where we get our definition of real food from. But it definitely dictates things that we should not be consuming. We should not be consuming processed food and bagels and chips and cookies and crackers, because that's not what this body is. I don't want to be building my body with those ingredients. So then the question is, what is the best source of nutrients, right? Because we can get nutrients from a lot of different things. What are the possible things that we can eat to get nutrients? Well, first of all, obviously real food. And without even going into our definition of real food, regardless of what your definition of real food is, there's a common sense definition of real food versus non-real food. All right, so real food is a place that we can get nutrients. Processed food is a place that we can get nutrients. I mean, intuitively, we could all probably agree it's not the best place, but we'll talk about why. And then, you know, even in the processed food realm, we have like what people consider to be healthy food. So we'd call this engineered health food, like protein bars and shakes and powders and things like that. And then of course we can get some nutrients from supplements and vitamins and minerals, which can be beneficial as a supportive adjunct to eating what we'd consider real food. But this is the spectrum of things that we can get nutrients from. So then the big question is, where should we be getting nutrients from? What's the ideal place? And I know that common sense we already know, but let's talk about why. So we have ancestral wisdom and the human digestive system to consider. What did our ancestors eat that made them so freaking healthy? Well, if we look at the fossil record, we'd see that there's evidence of dig sites all over the world that show animal carcasses, stone tools, meat extraction, marrow extraction, brain extraction, organ extraction. So it's obvious that our ancestors ate animal meats, traditional fats, nutrient-dense vegetables, depending on the seasonality and location of where they were. And then if we look at traditional human populations, we see the same thing. We've studied human populations for several centuries now. And the healthy ones, we can say, eat animal meats, traditional fats, nutrient-dense vegetables, and it varies by seasonality and geographical location. And then if we look at early historical records from explorers that would come over to the Americas and they would encounter these new populations, they would always describe them as very fit and healthy and lean and free of disease. And they were all documented as being omnivorous. They would eat meat and plants, and sometimes they were completely carnivorous. It just depended on where they lived. And then we have pioneers that have gone out and done research. So people like Dr. Weston A. Price, who traveled the world in the 1920s and 30s looking for very healthy populations. And he was curious to see what it was that made them so healthy. So he would live with them and analyze their food. And he came back and wrote some books. And what he found was that all these populations, again, ate local animal meats, traditional fats, nutrient-dense vegetables, some dairy products, and it varied by seasonality and geographical location. And then if we study modern hunter-gatherer populations that are still in existence today, that are living off the land, that have superior health markers, then we would see the same thing. They eat a balance of animal meats to plant matter, and it varies by geographical location and seasonality, right? But the bottom line, the big takeaway is that factoring in ancestral wisdom, whether it's fossil record or historical records or traditional populations or pioneers or modern hunter-gatherers, then the same conclusion is humans are omnivores. Humans eat minimally processed plants, animals, and fats. The foods vary by geographical location and seasonality, and some human populations eat nothing but animal meats or almost nothing but animal meats. And again, all these people have superior health markers. So this should start to tell us a little bit about what is the best place for us to get nutrients, because if this is giving such good health to these populations, we might want to consider eating the same thing. And then another really good question is, what is an animal supposed to eat? Well, we'd say whatever it's designed to eat based on its digestive system. A cow has a 4-chamber stomach, and it can take a lot of nutrient deplete plant matter and grass and convert it into short chain fatty acids through fermentation, and then use those fatty acids for different purposes. Other animals have hindgut or foregut fermentation systems, but humans do not have that capacity. We lost that capacity. Our digestive system, as we evolved, has started to shrink, and it shrank in response to us eating nutrient-dense and calorically dense foods, specifically animal foods. And as we evolved, our digestive system shrank, and it started to gear itself more towards nutrient assimilation and absorption versus fermenting. And that means that we need to focus on nutrient-dense foods, calorically dense foods, and we do really well on cooked foods. So that's another thing that's helped evolve our digestive system, is the control and use of fire. So cooking food starts to pre-break it down and pre-digest it, which makes it easier to assimilate. So the introduction of animal foods, nutrient-dense foods, calorically dense foods, and the control of fire is what has contributed to the shrinking of our digestive system and the increase in our brain size. All right, so to tie all that together, I mean, what we want to do is focus on real foods, nutrient-dense foods, and things that are easy to digest. All right. So we want to think of ourselves as real foodies, and this is a concept that we call vitalism versus reductionism, or vital foods versus dead foods. And it's just understanding that there's so much more value in real food than there is in processed food. So if I look at a steak is extremely healthy because a steak has a broad spectrum of nutrients. It's got proteins, it's got fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, cofactors, life force, vitality. It's perishable, which is a good thing. Perishability means that other organisms see value in that food, and we just want to get to that value before the other organisms do, right? Versus something that's shelf stable and protected indefinitely, right? We want to be cautious about those types of things. So a steak has a combination of nutrients, cofactors, and things that my body understands over years of evolution that work synergistically in a way that my body can understand and assimilate very easily. Versus something like a protein powder, which may have some nutritional value, but it's also shelf stable and dead, and it is not the same as consuming a piece of meat. We could say the same thing about produce. You know, we have things like orange juice, which might be considered healthy in some realms. We don't think it is. But orange juice is a derivative of oranges. It has been pasteurized, denatured, it's shelf stable, it's concentrated. It's not the same thing as eating an orange. An orange has vitamins and minerals and cofactors and life force and vitality. All right, so we want to look at foods from this vitalism concept whenever possible. We want to eat for maximum nutrients. We want to eat real food because real food has what we call nutrient synergy. The nutrients interact with each other in a way that is synergistic versus eating those nutrients or consuming them separately. And then we have what we call food synergy. So as we eat a broad variety of foods over time, those foods interact with each other in a way that's synergistic versus eating those foods by themselves. And then also we want to focus on minimizing toxins, and by eating real food, we're automatically having less toxins than processed food. And then we also want to focus on this concept of vitality and life force, meaning I want to, whenever possible, choose foods that are fresh and living and perishable, because that perishability means there's some value in those foods. And that's not an absolute. You know, a lot of us consume, you know, bottled olive oil and canned coconut milk and things that are in packages like pork rinds and things. But just big picture overview, common sense, we want to choose fresh, vital foods whenever possible. So this brings us to our definition of real food, which is a very forgiving and broad definition of real food. Within this definition of real food, the big question is, what is it that we do best on? And this is where experimentation comes into play, all right? So the big plate on our definition of real food is where the majority of our meals need to come from. because this is a nutrient-dense based way of eating, right? So animal meats by far give us the biggest bang for buck when it comes to nutrients, because we are animals and our digestive system is geared for direct nutrient to nutrient assimilation, meaning if I want vitamin A, I need to consume vitamin A. If I want muscle, I need to consume muscle. If I want tendons and ligaments and cartilage and connective tissue, I need to consume those things. So animal meats resemble us, and consuming animal meats gives us what we need. Within that animal meat realm, we think what's ideal, again, contrary to conventional wisdom's view of what's healthy, we think it's ideal to consume fatty cuts, bone in, and skin on, because that gives you a lot more nutrients to work with. A chicken breast is perfectly fine. It's in the real food realm, but it's not anywhere near as nutrient viable or beneficial as a chicken drumstick or wing, because when I eat a chicken drumstick or wing, I'm getting the skin, which gives me skin. I'm getting collagen from the skin. I'm getting some connective tissue, which gives me connective tissue. And of course, I'm getting the protein and the muscle meat from the muscle meat, right? So we want to think in terms of big packages, bone in, skin on, fatty cuts whenever possible. But in that meat realm, you can consume just about anything that you resonate with. And then our next beneficial food group, and the most powerful, second most powerful, is going to be healthy and traditional fats. Our top traditional fat is going to be real butter. Butter is a nutrient powerhouse. The reason butter is yellow is because it has carotenoids, vitamin A, vitamin D, fat-soluble nutrients, and cofactors. It is a nutrient powerhouse, and it also has a lot of medium-chain triglycerides in it, which are really easy for the body to use for energy. One of our goals is training the body how to use fat-based energy, and butter's like a powerhouse in that realm. So we'd say consuming traditional fats with all of your meals is going to ensure that you're giving your body a fat-based source of energy. It's going to help you assimilate the fat-soluble nutrients, and butter is by far one of our top picks. If you have an extreme sensitivity to dairy, you can use ghee instead of butter, which is clarified butter without the milk solids. And then also we're huge fans of coconut oil, olive oil, avocados, other animal fats like lard, tallow, duck fat, lamb fat, suet, so anything in that traditional fat realm is going to be awesome to experiment with. But fats are nutrient powerhouses, and they also give us a fat-based source of energy. And then vegetables and greens are awesome. So nutrient-dense vegetables like cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower and asparagus. You're not limited to those things. You can eat just about anything in the vegetable realm. Because of the way our digestive system is geared, we'd say the heartier the produce, the more beneficial it would be to cook it. So something like broccoli and cauliflower would benefit from being cooked, because it will make it easier to digest. If you've got some soft greens like some spinach or kale or arugula or some spring greens, then those would be fine to be eaten raw with a little bit of salad dressing. But this would be what we consider to be our main nutrient sources. They give us a lot of beneficial nutrients and fat-based energy. And so again, the majority of our meals need to look like this. We have a smaller plate of carbohydrates. Now, when we say carbohydrates, we mean dominant sources of starch and sugar, all right, dominant sources of glucose. Although some people technically call broccoli carbohydrates, we don't think it has enough glucose in it to be considered a carbohydrate. So to us, carbohydrates are our safe starches, which are our sweet potatoes, yams. We prefer white rice over brown rice. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the toxicity section. Potatoes of any kind, ancestral tubers like taro, cassava, yucca, plantains. You could throw squashes in that category. And then also we're big fans of fruit. But notice this plate is a little bit smaller, so we want to have moderated carbohydrate amounts. We have a 3/4 cup symbol there next to each one, so we'd say a maximum in a day is going to be 3/4 cup of safe starches, 3/4 cup of fruit, and that's the max that you want to go in a day. That's about 1.5 cups of carbohydrates, which is still pretty liberal. All right, and then we also have a category of full-fat dairy. We love full-fat dairy. We think full-fat dairy is extremely helpful and beneficial. Full-fat dairy has tremendous nutritional value. It also has a lot of great fat-based energy. Some people are sensitive to dairy, so that's one of the things we definitely want to experiment with. But within the full-fat dairy realm, we'd say cheeses of all kinds, full-fat plain yogurt, full-fat Greek yogurt, all the different creams like heavy cream and sour cream and cream cheese. They're all great condiments to a real food way of eating. But notice these are smaller plates, and so what we're looking for is the majority of our meals to come from the animal meats and traditional fats and nutrient-dense vegetables, and then the carbohydrates and the full-fat dairy are more like complements to a real food way of eating. Now, once we've dialed in being a real foodie, or we're almost completely there, like we're very comfortable with it, then we want to experiment with superfoods and supplements. And so this is a whole other workshop and seminar that we have, but superfoods would be things like bone stock and bone marrow and organ meats and wild-caught salmon and salmon roe and things that we might not even consider consuming right now, but we know that they have such tremendous nutritional value. It would be great to supplement a real food way of eating with. And then there are some strategic foundational supplements that we recommend throwing into the mix. Now, a question we get here is, and again, this is people transitioning over from, another way of doing things to this real food SHT way of doing things is, isn't this a lot of calories? And we'd say, yeah, it is a lot of calories, but it's also a lot of nutrients. And so the question is, like, is it possible to eat too much of this stuff? Well, theoretically, sure, I'm sure it's possible to eat too much steak, but it doesn't happen because the body auto-regulates appetite through this nutrient signaling. So when I start to eat nutrient-dense foods consistently over time, my body gets nutritionally sufficient, and then my body starts to give me signals of, hey, I'm good. I don't need anything else, or I don't need as much as I used to need before. And so what happens over time is most of our people will notice within days their appetite completely changes and they don't want to eat all the time because their body is becoming nutritionally sufficient. What happens is when we eat specific foods, the ones that we're recommending, we give the body what it needs, especially if we balance it in the right amounts. We'll talk more about that in the metabolic efficiency section. But anything in excess of what the body needs for its structure, form, and function would go to excess body fat and waste. But the reality is that when we eat these nutrient-dense foods, that takes care of itself because the body auto-regulates itself. All right? So just to summarize this concept of nutritional vitality, roles of nutrients in the body are extremely beneficial, especially the macronutrients. Understanding traditional fats and meats and produce do a lot of good inside the body because there's a lot of nutritional value, there's minimal toxicity, and it helps with metabolic efficiency. Our digestive systems are geared for nutrient density, caloric density, and cooked foods. All right, so it doesn't mean you have to cook everything, but it's just saying that we need to acknowledge that cooking food is actually beneficial and makes it easier to digest. There's a difference between consuming real food and processed food of any kind because real food is not just nutrient dense, it's got the nutrient synergy, we get the food synergy, it's vital and it's living and it's something my body understands very well. And then real food is appetite regulating, especially the way that we recommend eating because it's so nutrient dense and it gives us auto-regulation signals. All right, so I think some big action steps going forward just from this episode would be always trying to choose real food over processed foods because now we understand the value of consuming real food. Choosing vital, living, fresh foods whenever possible because we want to think in terms of consuming things that we jive with. We are living in vital, and if we consume things that are perishable and living in vital, we inherit some of that perishable or vitality. And that's not an absolute because obviously we have condiments and things in jars and cans that we can use to support our way of doing things as long as they're made with the right ingredients. But just in general, we want to start thinking in terms of consuming fresh, real food. And then also just consider cooking most of your foods. We're not saying obliterate your foods, but just understand that lightly cooking foods or gently cooking foods is going to be beneficial because it makes it easier to digest, okay? And again, if you haven't already, join our community over at community.superhumantransformation.com. We will see you guys in the next video.